Welcome to the Everyday Royalty Podcast, where our guests share how they are learning to live in the world, but not of the world. Join us as we seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness and learn how all these things are added to us as well. Here's your host, licensed professional clinical counselor and faith and focus coach, Carrie Kitchen.
I'm thrilled to introduce to you today's guest, Dr. Karl Lehman. Dr. Lehman is a board-certified psychiatrist with 25 years and more than 40,000 hours of clinical experience. He has worked tenaciously throughout his career to integrate his personal Christian faith with medical science, modern mental health care, and his rigorous scientific training. And he has especially worked to integrate faith-based emotional healing with insights provided by psychological and neurological research. In addition to observations from his clinical work and extensive ongoing study of a wide range of research literature, Dr. Lehman is also deeply committed to his own growth and healing. He is constantly learning through the application of emotional healing principles and tools in his personal journey. In this conversation, Dr. Lehman shares a bit about his journey as he began starting to look for a way to help his patients get unstuck, but found a way that not only did that, but helped him find healing as well. In this journey, he developed the Immanual Approach to prayer, which is an approach to help establish and deepen a real, lasting, interactive, and intimate connection with Jesus Christ. It was a true joy to have a conversation with Dr. Lehman, and I trust that you are going to love it just as much as I did. If you haven't already, be sure to rate and review this podcast so others can hear these conversations too. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to the show, Dr. Karl.
Amen. Glad to be here.
I have been so looking forward to talking to you. I came across parts of your story maybe close to a year ago at this point, and I am so excited to hear more and share more of it with our listeners. So I just want to start by inviting you to share some of your story leading into what God has you doing now.
Yeah, so I'm a psychiatrist, Christian psychiatrist, and all through my pre-med, medical school, residency, I was very actively integrating my faith, prayer for healing with brain science, psychology, psychotherapy. So when I started my practice, right from the beginning, I was sort of combining therapy with prayer for healing. Good heart. And all through medical school, I've been reading, I don't know if you're familiar with people like Francis McNutt or John and Agnes Sanford, or Agnes Sanford, John and Paula Sanford, different people, 1950s, 60s, from the 1950s onward. There have been a number of different people who kind of pioneered the idea that God knows about the psychological trauma. God knows about how that system works, and God can heal painful memories. That can be one part of helping people to thrive and removing the ways in which old painful experiences can still affect us and cause trouble. So I've been, reading that all through my medical training. And started my practice, like I said, including sort of therapy and prayer together. And initially, while I was just a beginner, and I didn't get any, like in medical school and residency, nobody was teaching me how to do that. I mean, I hadn't been figured that out on my own. So I was a bit green, didn't have a lot of troubleshooting skills, and I would see occasionally. A person would be in a traumatic memory and they would experience the presence of Jesus and get really dramatic, beautiful healing. Like I read it, like from the books. It's like, oh my gosh, that's like I just read in the books. But that was about 5%. It was glorious when it happened, but it was small. It was a small amount of the time. And part of what that means is 95% of the time, I've got, patients, at least for me, I can't take care of somebody. I mean, they're a human being. They're in my office and they're in great pain. If they're in my office, they tend to be pretty pain. They're in a lot of pain. They're not in my office if they're not miserable. So 95% of the time, I'm working with people that are in a lot of pain, and I'm seeing real dramatic healing and transformation about 1 out of 20. And my other tools, the medication would help people cope. My other therapy tools would help people cope. But mostly people are in a lot of pain, coping, and not getting real transformation. So that's painful. I mean, to spend 95% of your time with people you really care about who are in pain and they're not getting real transformation, breakthrough healing. So that's a lot of motivation. Being in pain most of the time, all day, every day is very motivating. So, I constantly was looking for new resources. Learned about, I don't know if people have heard about EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a secular tool that uses neurological principles to help sort of facilitate healing for psychological trauma. And I saw, and I combined that with prayer. So I would use the EMDR together with prayer for healing. And with that, it went from, maybe 5% to 20, 30, 40%, which was, 30, 40% is way better than 5%.
Right.
But it's still 2/3 of the time, people I care about are still in a lot of pain and they're coping and not getting real transformation. So that's still a lot of pain on my side, as far as like, wow, this is hard to be with people every day and feel like I'm just helping them to limp along. Hard. So learn about Theophostic. That might be something people have heard of as well. Another tool, another approach for healing psychological trauma. And results went up a notch with that as well. That was some other really good principles. Better trouble, or at each step, I learned more troubleshooting tools. I got more faith. When I learned about Theophostic, I actually started getting my own healing, and that was a good benefit. Just a general recommendation. That's a good idea for anybody in ministry. Get your own healing as well. I noticed that as I got my own healing, my discernment improved, my faith improved, my emotional capacity improved. Every aspect of my ability to facilitate improved as I got my own healing. I learned more troubleshooting tools, and with Theophostic and EMDR and healing prayer all together, I was getting, it might be 70, 75%, which is a whole lot better than 5% or 40%. But that means that still every week I've got people that are still in a lot of pain and working hard and not getting real transformative breakthrough healing for key trauma. And so that was, there a lot of satisfaction there. I mean, that's every single week I saw people with really profound healing. I mean, I saw people experience the presence of God and get real life-changing healing every week. But I also every week had people that we were working and it wasn't moving forward. So I was still, as things kind of plateaued at 75%, they kept going up and up and up, that was all encouraging. And they kind of leveled off. And I realized there was a cohort of people in my practice that, there were people that I had a session every week for a year. We're talking 50 sessions of troubleshooting. Everything we could think of: bitterness, persistent sin, demonic interference, guardian blocking lies, blocking fear, dissociation, is everything I had ever heard about, and things that we hadn't heard about and thought up for ourselves. And we had tried everything we could think of. And there were a group of people, like maybe 20, 25%. There was a cohort of my patients that were still limping and coping and not getting, they were not able to get through key traumatic memories. And they would often be able to kind of find the traumatic memory, and even we kind of work with it some, but for everything we knew, we weren't able to get all the way through to healing. So there was one week, and there was one day where I had worked with several of these people, and I'm in the middle of a session, and I'm just like, okay, Jesus, I know you can heal. I know you can heal this. I know you want to heal it. We cannot figure out how to do that. We cannot figure out what's in the way. We cannot figure out how to cooperate with your healing work here. Can you please help me? Can you please help us? And immediately, this was one of the clearest experiences I've ever had of feeling like, whoa, that thought, like I asked for help and a clear thought came from not my brain. It felt, all of my experiences of God's presence tend to be subtle, but this was on my personal scale of experience. This was toward the top 5 in my life of like, whoa, I think that was from the Lord. A very clear thought that was, okay, take a break, like sort of shift the priority from like trying to focus all our energy and our attention on getting into these traumatic memories and how do we help the person get through them, shift the focus on help the person experience the living, tangible, interactive presence of Jesus and just spend time with him. That's the first priority. And healing the traumatic memories, we'll kind of wait for his guidance on that. But shift the first priority to help the person perceive and connect with Jesus and just spend time with Jesus. So it's like, okay. And we did that and something new started happening. So we did that for a while. So, and there was a handful, basically long story short, over the course of maybe a month, I realized, I think there's something important here. And so all of my people who were stuck, I started trying this approach. And some of them after a few sessions, some of them after 5 months, but they all started moving forward. And part of the picture there is at that same time, I don't know if people are familiar with Dr. Wilder, Jim Wilder, Life Model Works. He does a lot of work with brain science and healing prayer and maturity and how to help people and families and communities thrive. But he and I were talking on the phone every week, trying to work on a joint project. And I had been going to a lot of his seminars and teaching conferences. And I've been learning from Dr. Wilder about what we call capacity. And that's, in the physical world, you kind of know about, we all intuitively know this. If you have a bridge designed for people, like, you're on a nature trail and there's a little wooden bridge over a little stream. And you right away realize, okay, 5 or 10 people could walk across that bridge. But if you put a train on that bridge, it's going to without having to have an engineering degree, you can look at a little wooden bridge and realize that's got the capacity to carry 10 people, but it's not going to carry a train. And you're right. If you put a train on that bridge, bam, it's going to just collapse into the ravine. Same thing. If you have a bucket, it has a finite volume. If you put a gallon in a gallon bucket, you fill it up. If you put 3 gallons in a gallon bucket, it goes onto the floor. Same way with electrical circuits. We all know about that. That if you put the vacuum cleaner and the blender, if you turn on 3 or 4 high in large engine appliances at the same time, your fuse blows and you got to go to the basement or your breaker. Nowadays they've got breakers. That electrical circuits also have like a limited capacity. If you put too much on an electrical circuit, hopefully if you're in a new house in the first world, your breaker blows. If you're not, your wires just get hot, and if you keep going, they turn red and they eventually burn your house down. So same way with your brain, mind, spirit system has a limited amount of capacity. And to be able to heal a traumatic memory, you've got to be able to connect with it and stay connected. A necessary part of processing is you actually have to be connected with the memory as you process it for healing. And if you don't have enough capacity, you either can't connect up front, you just can look at the memory from a distance, but you can't connect with it, or halfway through you disconnect. And that's what I've been seeing with all of my people who have been stuck. That's what I've been seeing. And the pieces kind of came together. I said, I think these people all have capacity problems. And if you have a capacity problem, no other troubleshooting is going to fix it. If the person simply doesn't have the capacity to stay connected, you can work on persistent sim, you can work on sin, you can work on choice, you can do any deliverance prayer you want to, you can troubleshoot, no other troubleshooting is going to fix the problem if you don't have enough capacity to stay connected. That kind of made sense. I realized, I think that's the common denominator for all my people who are stuck. And one of the best possible things you can do to help capacity is, one, spend time with Jesus. Just spending time with Jesus will kind of build your capacity over time. And 2, if you're in a traumatic memory and you experience the presence of Jesus with you, you can actually share to the proportional to the strength of your connection. You can share Jesus's capacity. Here's a little analogy that everybody will get. So here you go. Take a 4-year-old child, 5-year-old child, open up the door to the basement oh, the light bulb's burnt out. It's totally dark. Can you go down there behind the furnace and, get my pipe wrench? And if you've got a 5-year-old who's like, if they don't have the capacity, if that's too scary, even if they're normally a compliant child, they'll just be like, they'll stand at the top of the stairs and just kind of like, Okay. If you say, oh, I'll go with you, and you take their hand, a task that was beyond their capacity, it was too scary for them by themselves. But if you go with them and take their hand, oh, okay, well, if dad's going with me, I can do that. And memories where a person cannot go into it by themselves. If they've practiced connecting with Jesus, they can feel his tangible presence. They've kind of come to believe, oh my God, this works. I can feel him with me. He's going to stay with me. If they actually feel him going with them, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of memories where people don't have capacity, that the balance tips, the equation shifts, and all of a sudden you're going forward. So that idea of shifting the focus of my work to, the first priority was help the person perceive Jesus, have a connection with Jesus, experience Jesus's living, tangible, interactive connection. That was the first sort of seed. That was the beginning of what I call the Immanual approach. The idea to make that be the foundation, the beginning, the start, the core, the foundation of everything I do. That was the beginning of the story. That was the sort of the first seed of the process. And then over the next couple of years, Dr. Wilder and I worked together to develop kind of the rest of the story there. And eventually I realized, it's wonderful for these people who have capacity problems, but guess what? If you can use this for everybody. And even people who they were doing healing work okay, the other tools we were working were okay. But if you start each session by helping them connect with Jesus, and they experience the presence of Jesus right at the beginning, and they can feel the living, tangible, interactive presence of Jesus beside them and with them through the whole process, guess what? Everything else works better. I mean, every other technique I used was like smoother, easier, gentler, faster. I'm like, in retrospect, it's like, duh. But part of the picture, it had never occurred to me that you could help a person connect with Jesus before you got into the traumatic memory. I mean, the models I'd seen from Agnes Sanford, Francis McNutt, and everybody else I'd ever read for my whole life is you find the traumatic memory, the facilitator, the prayer minister, I help you figure out what the problem is. I help you find the traumatic memory. I help you get into it. Once we get into the memory, we kind of figure out what are the issues, what are the distorted perceptions, where's the lie. I do most of the work. And then, okay, this is where you come in, Jesus. We're at step 5 here. And we bring the presence of God in for, okay, can you please heal? Now that we've got this all set up, can you please come into this traumatic memory and heal it? Which does work. It just had never occurred to me. And I'd never heard anybody else, as far as I could tell, it hadn't occurred to anybody. What if we help the person connect with Jesus right at the beginning? And part of what other pieces that help the light bulb go on for Dr. Wilder and I, that as far as we can tell, the light bulb had never gone on for anybody else, was applied brain science. One of the pieces of applied brain science is we have a part of our brains, which I call our relational circuits. There's a part of our brains that God designed to sort of be the hardware for relationships. I mean, God has created us to be relational beings. He wants us to be in relationship with each other and with himself. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, I think that's hugely biblical. Everywhere in the Bible is a relationship, one another, with each other, and also to know and be in relationship with God. I have a medical degree, not a theological degree, but just having been a believer all my life and, read through the Bible cover to cover, I don't know how many times, just as a layperson, I think that's a pretty simple, or that's not one of the complicated, debatable points in the Bible. Like, relationship is important. And not surprisingly, if relationship is that important, it shouldn't surprise us that God actually designed a big part of our brains to run that, to be the hardware for running relationships neurologically. Well, if those relational circuits are offline, everything relational works badly. I mean, that's like if you get overwhelmed, if you get triggered in certain ways, like the higher functioning parts of your brain, including your relational circuits, sort of go offline, and you sort of regress to, people call fight or flight. People call, your reptile brain. You kind of go, you go into just survive, take care of yourself. You're in survival mode, and you can still run from a bear. You can still fight if you're in combat. You can still look for food if you're hungry. But as far as any kind of relationship stuff, it doesn't work well if you're in your reptile fight or flight survival brain and your relational circuits are off. So everything relational works well if your relational circuits are on, poorly if they're off. That's one piece of brain science. Well, so another interesting piece of brain science. The way your brain's wired is if you're feeling appreciation, it brings your relational circuits on. In fact, as far as we can tell, it's impossible to feel appreciation and have your relational circuits off at the same time. If you're feeling appreciation, your relational circuits are off. So if you have a person with their relational circuits off and you deliberately coach them, close your eyes, kind of go inside, picture yourself inside, pick a really special positive memory. There I am on Christmas morning when I'm 8 years old, and I got, I got a bow and arrow I've been asking for years, or here I am at my graduation or my wedding day or whatever. Picture yourself inside a really strong positive memory, and take 5 minutes to think about and describe the parts of the memory that you appreciate the most. Just describe the details until it's really, that helps you connect to picture it and describe the details vividly, helps you to really connect to the positive memory. And as you do that, the experience inside the memory, the appreciation in the memory, and thinking about the memory, that'll all generate appreciation. And if you do that, you can very predictably turn your relational circuits on. If somebody comes into my office, I don't care how stressed out, how upset, I don't care where you're at when you come in. If I help you really get inside a positive memory and coach you to talk about the details until you can feel it, you will connect to the memory, feel appreciation, and turn your relational circuits on. So one thought we had is, well, if we're understanding this all correctly, that should be a place where a person would have an easy time connecting with God. Because as far as we can tell, the relational circuits for people also moderate our relationship with God. So we thought, okay, what if we start with a positive memory, appreciation, turn the person's relational circuits on, and we invite God to be with them in a positive memory. And Jim and I, we were like, well, can you do that? We just never heard of that. We never heard anybody talk about that. It never occurred to us. Everybody, no, you go into the bad memory. Once you're in the middle of the bad memory, you ask God to come and heal it, which that's a good idea. But it had never occurred to us, well, can you do that with a positive memory? I don't know. Let's try it. So we did. And it's like, what do you know? Who knew? So in a traumatic memory, one of my experiences was that it's easier to see the light in the darkness. So there's people who have subtle experiences, and you have the positive memory thing, and they're like, I'm not sure, since maybe I kind of sense Jesus' presence, but maybe it's my imagination. Okay, for people who have subtle experiences, if you're in a traumatic memory and all of a sudden you sense the presence of Jesus, you can feel the trauma, you can feel things shift. It's easier to see light in the darkness. So there's a way in which, in my experience, it was easier to spot Jesus if I was in the middle of a bad place. But in general, we found that for a lot of people, they actually connected with Jesus easier in the positive memory. Not only does it, yes, it actually works, but many people experienced that it was actually easier. So well, that's interesting. And here's another piece of the Immanual approach that's a cool thing. So if the first thing you do is help the person connect with a positive memory and turn their relational circuits on and connect with Jesus in that place. So they're in a positive memory, feeling gratitude, and experiencing a living, interactive connection with Jesus. So for one, that's a real gentle, safe, easy on-ramp for people who are kind of scared about the whole emotional healing thing. Real gentle, easy on-ramp. And it's also a safety net. Because if you get into trouble anywhere, especially since there's way more trauma in the world than there are mental health professionals. I mean, like right now, Ukraine, I mean, in the last month, they've created 20 million new people with post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, if we wait for mental health professionals trained for healing and psychological trauma, most of the people in the world who've got trauma are never going to get care. To even get close to meeting the need. And then that's big dramatic trauma on television. And all the rest of us have smaller trauma. There's, if I have time, I can talk about how that works. But what I've become completely convinced there's small T trauma. There's big T trauma, which is when a bomb falls on your house, and kills half your friends. That's big T trauma. Everybody can spot that. But there can be small painful experiences that if you're a child especially, and you don't process it successfully, you can have little traumas that are kind of more subtle, but still cause trouble for actually, I think, everybody. So all of us have small T trauma. Tens of millions of people have big T trauma. If we don't get an army of millions of lay people, we're not going to come close to caring for that need. So if you're going to have millions of lay people trying to help people heal trauma, what do they do if they get in there? And the average layperson, they don't have mental health training, and they come to a weekend seminar or something. One of the things that leaders of churches or in ministries, they're aware of, what about you get into a complicated big trauma and you don't know what to do? And that's an accurate concern, and it happens. And you have, I've actually been there. I've been in ministry settings before I knew about an Emmanuel, and we have kind of healing ministry prayer times and invite people, think of a painful memory and invite Jesus. And some people would get wonderful results, but on a regular basis, people would get stuck. There'd be some people who would get stuck in a bad memory. And in that setting, without a one-on-one troubleshooter with training, they get stuck there, and it would be a really bad experience. Medium bad, it was miserable, or really bad, they got stuck inside there, they got re-traumatized, they end up in the emergency room. I only did that once myself with something I was in charge of, because that was like a steep learning curve. I was like, whoa, that's bad, don't do that again. But I was present for many ministry situations where that was the model. And of course, at the end of the prayer time, they would have people come up on stage and testify for healing. But then they would come to me and say, hey, Dr. Karl, we got somebody curled up behind the door in a fetal position, kind of rocking back and forth, whimpering. Can you please come and fix it? And that's a serious concern. Not just for, I want to bring this ministry into your church, and the pastor thinks, hey, I don't want to get the 3 a.m. phone call that one of my parishioners is in the emergency room. And the lay people who are asking to be volunteers, they don't want to be the person who's in the prayer ministry session and, I helped my friend get into a really traumatic memory, but she got stuck, and I've used all the tools I knew about. Now what do we do? So in those situations, all you got to do is take the person back to the positive memory, appreciation, and connection with Jesus that you just practiced and refreshed at the beginning of the prayer session. So a lay person can use this technique. And if they run into trouble anywhere in the session, that's above my pay grade. I'm out of my depth. I found something I don't know what to do with. Okay. Time out. Just get the plane back on the ground. And you might be disappointed that you didn't heal the memory, but you end the prayer time and the person's back at a positive memory, feeling appreciation, connected to Jesus. Their plane is back on the ground, and they're a little disappointed, but most people can handle that. You're not going to the emergency room. You're not sitting with them for a couple hours as they sob and whimper, and you're kind of thinking, oh my gosh, the whole time you're wondering, should I call for more help? I mean, that's a miserable experience. And most people, they do that once and they don't come back. So right. That's a piece of it provides a safety net. It's a real gentle startup. And here's another huge benefit. If the first thing you do is help the person get a positive memory and connect with Jesus, Jesus will then be in the driver's seat for the whole session. What do we want to do? What do you want to do with the session, Jesus? Every step of the way, you can ask for Jesus's guidance. At any point in the session, if you have a question or problem, you ask Jesus for, hey, so what about this, Jesus? And the whole journey, even going into the traumatic memory, they're aware of Jesus' presence with them. So the whole idea of being with Jesus and having increased capacity, and every place of the session where the facilitator has to bring skill. What's the problem here? How can we find the traumatic memory? Directly proportional to the strength of their connection with Jesus. Jesus brings all that. You just basically turn to him. Well, is Jesus still there? Ask him. He brings all that training and skill and understanding about how does this work? Where's the traumatic memory? Where's this coming from? How do we find it? And the more of the hard jobs you can hand to Jesus, the more easily lay volunteers can use this tool. So as that's coming together, we're like, for people who can get a good connection with Jesus, I can teach you in a weekend how to use basic Immanual Approach tools, where mostly I say, okay, well, Carrie, is Jesus still there? Yeah. Okay, well, focus on him, ask him for guidance and help, and tell me what happens. We go for 5 minutes. Oh, there's some other issue. There's some question. You have some question. You have some problem. You have whatever. I'll say, okay, well, so get words for, so describe what's going on for me there. Okay, so try to get words for what the problem is. Okay, good. So is Jesus still there? Great. So focus on Jesus and take that directly to him. Ask him for guidance and help, and tell me what happens. And like I said, in retrospect, I mean, Dr. Wilder and I, when we put all this together, and we're like, it just seems so obvious. It's just like, why didn't somebody think of this 1,000 years ago? I mean, the idea that Jesus can heal, we've been doing that. And there's even, I mean, if you go back in literature, you can find, and I found an account from like France in the Dark Ages, 800, AD, some monastery, in rural France. And if you read the account, the person went into a traumatic memory, Jesus showed up and healed it. Great. But the brain science tools of how can we systematically, deliberately help that happen on a regular basis, to have it happen once in a while, sort of accidentally. I mean, that's wonderful. It's better than nothing. But the idea, brain science, positive memory, appreciation, turn the relational circuits, help them get Jesus at the beginning. Then if they're with Jesus, he'll increase their capacity. All the complexity, we can say, okay, Jesus, what about that? Can you please handle that? The layperson facilitator, they don't have to know about all the processing tasks in your brain. All they have to know about is, okay, well, is Jesus still there? Well, I'm not sure what's going on. Ask Jesus. Great. And if you run into trouble that you don't know how to handle, you go back to your positive memory and ask Jesus for help there. And at the end of the session, if you run out of time, this is another big one. If you do this much, people who are paying attention, well, for one, either they're not thinking very carefully and they try it and it eventually happens. It's just a matter of time until they get somebody who has a bigger pain pile or a complicated, something's complicated. And basically, even if it's kind of working, but they get to the end of the time they got and they're not done. Whether it's a therapist or a prayer minister, you've got an appointment. There's somebody else in your waiting room. Here it is, it's 3:00, and somebody else, you agreed to see them at 3:00. You're out of time, or any other, your children are coming home from school, or fill in the blank. You're working with somebody and they're not done and you're out of time. That's another one that's like, oh my goodness, that happens a couple of times and you're like, hey, you know what? I think I'm gonna let somebody else do this. Especially if you're a layperson and you don't, mental health professionals have other tools they've been trained in about how to handle that situation, what to do if you're out of time and a person is still feeling bad, how to use relaxation tools, whatever. But the average lay volunteer that we need hundreds of millions of, that's an unpleasant experience. To be, here's somebody I care about, they're in a traumatic memory, we're working at it, and we're running out of time, and they're still in a horrible place. Same safety net. You look at your watch. Hey, we're about 10 minutes from the end. We can come back here, but for this time, I want to get your plane back on the ground. So we're going to change gears, and I'm not minimizing the importance of this place. We're going to come back to this place, but for right now, I want to change gears so we get your plane back on the ground, so that when 3:00 comes, I have to see my next person. You have to go home and take care of kids. I want your plane to be back on the ground when we get done at 3:00. And you take them back to their positive memory, appreciation, reconnect with Jesus, and you get to 3:00 and they're like, okay, well, I'm disappointed we didn't get all done today, but they're back at an okay place. They can go over and take care of their kid, and you can see your next patient. Another big safety net piece. So those are, and I'll throw in one more brain science piece here. The brain science, relational circuits, the safety net piece is huge. Having the capacity with Jesus, that's great. Another one, if we just sort of, well, some people have known this intuitively about it's important to kind of describe what's happening. But if you know the brain science, well, the reason, as far as I know, I'm the most intense about this point is because I think I understand the brain science the best. And the short summary there is our brains are designed to work best in community, which is another just like, that's a whole, I mean, I can give a whole hour-long presentation on all the ways our brains are designed to work best in community. But one of the ways is that there's often subtle content in your internal awareness. You'll be in a prayer session, and sometimes there's real obvious stuff. A big important memory will come forward, and you'll immediately feel the emotions, and you can figure out, wow, this is important right away. Okay, those are easy. But a surprisingly large amount of the time, you'll be in a prayer ministry session, and you're not quite sure what's happening, and you're asking the Lord for guidance, and clues will come into the person's mind, and they won't recognize them. Or even they'll kind of perceive the Lord's presence, but it'll be subtle. There'll be some way in which the Lord will be manifesting, and they're expecting something big and dramatic, and they kind of don't recognize the subtle thing is, oh, Jesus is there. It's just subtle. And there are parts of your brain, the front, on the right and the left, where that's where those are the places in your brain that help you, one, feel that something's important, and two, recognize, so how does this fit into my story? Like, how is this relevant to me? This image, this memory that's coming forward, what's the point? Does it feel important? And what's the point? Where does it fit in? And if a particular image or thought that comes into your awareness doesn't go through those parts of your brain, you ask God for guidance, and a big clue comes forward and is sitting right in front of your face, and you can't feel that it's important, and you don't recognize how it fits in, and you say, it's not working, nothing's happening, which actually I've done this as the recipient. And having written the chapter on this and knowing the brain science, even as it was happening, I'm telling my prayer partner, it's really not working. And he says, hey, Karl, you wrote the chapter, do your own thing. Well, there's just something has come forward, but it's not important. It's just a distraction. He goes, yeah, you have a whole part of your chapter about that. Humor me, describe it anyway. And there was an image that had come forward, and it was the weirdest thing. Before I described it to my prayer partner, I could not recognize what it meant, or feel that it was important. And within 30 seconds of starting to describe it, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a memory. It fits in. It's important. I'm feeling emotions. I'm like, the simple process of noticing whatever's coming into your awareness, getting words for it, and describing it out loud to another person, regardless of whether or not it makes sense or feels important. That little tool took me 1 minute to summarize. It takes a while to learn to practice as a recipient, and as a facilitator, you can learn the skill of kind of coaching a person to do that. But that little simple intervention, maybe 30% of the people you pray with who previously said it's not working, you add that one piece of brain science, and all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, there were subtle manifestations of God's presence. There were subtle clues. There was a bunch of subtle stuff that we were missing. And now that we're catching all those clues and memories and images, all of a sudden, oh, it is working after all. So that's the super short summary of about 2 years of work with Dr. Wilder and I, figuring out how the brain science pieces fit in and figuring out how to put them together. And now that the process is all put together, it looks pretty simple. That's a common phenomenon in science and medicine and all kinds of places. After somebody invents it, everybody else says, oh, I could have done that. Well, yeah, it's usually easier to understand something after it's been done than to invent it the first time. And both of us, after we put it together, we were both like, exactly like, why didn't somebody think of this 1,000 years ago? Why didn't we think of it 20 years ago? In fact, as we were putting all this together, and Dr. Wilder says, hey, Dr. Karl, you need to write all this up. And I hate to write. It's slow. It's painful. I'm not a natural writer. And I'm like, I don't know why we haven't found it sooner, but this is so simple and so obvious, and it works. It is so easy to test it. Once you have these thoughts and put them together and you try it, it's like it works. So I thought, there's got to be 1,000 other people who've already discovered this. We just need to find them. Surely they're there. Somebody else has already written this book. I just need to find it, and then I can just tell people to go read it. That'll be way easier than me writing it. We spent a year. Well, mostly I spent a year, because he searched through his memory banks as well, but I spent a year because I didn't want to do it. And as far as we can tell, nobody else stumbled on the pieces and put them together this way. So there you go. That's the super short summary crash course about the Immanuel approach. Did that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's just a drop in the bucket of everything I've read of your material too, and all the videos I've watched and everything else. But it is an excellent summary. And I love how much hope it gives people who have felt so stuck. You said something at the very beginning. You were talking about how pain is such a motivator, and how and I know as a clinician, it's so frustrating when you see somebody and you want them to have the breakthrough so desperately because you do care, and because you have such compassion for them because they're hurting. So this is like when I first started hearing about your work and what you have been learning and how it's been working for others and getting people unstuck, I was just mind blown, because I think God has given us all those answers. Even the fact that you were talking about how you were seeking, that's always the beginning. When we start seeking, when we recognize there is a pain point, and we start seeking him more deeply, and we say, okay, God, lead me to it. And it wasn't until we actually take it to him and say, okay, I'm going to step back and let you step in here. And that's the whole basis of the approach. That's what's so amazing about it, because it is like, seek first the kingdom of God. Seek him first. He'll take care of the rest.
That's another one. This is another one. There have been 100 places as I've been developing this, and now it's been 20 years since the first seeds kind of dropped in my lap. So as I've been developing it and using it for 20 years now, there have been so many places where I'm thinking, oh my goodness, right, that's totally biblical. Like you just said, like, seek ye first the kingdom. The whole idea of, let's start with Jesus. Jesus will be not just sort of vague theory, but helping the person actually perceive his tangible, living, interactive presence. Help them actually establish an interactive back and forth relationship connection with the living, tangible presence of Jesus. That's the beginning. That's the foundation. That's the center. That's the most important part of the whole thing. Oh, yeah. Like, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all these. That's real consistent.
It makes sense then.
It makes sense. And there's 100 other verses where as I've been going along, I'm like, oh, this is that verse. Oh, here it is. Look, exactly. There you go, right there. So totally.
It's so exciting.
Very exciting. And for just a perspective piece, so I don't know if you have a video version of what you do or whether it's just all audio, but for the audio people, I'm holding up an 800-page book in my hand here, so this is actually like the first third is the beginner book, the middle third is the intermediate book, and the last third is the advanced book. So it's the whole library. It's the beginner, intermediate, and advanced all in one book. And what I say is, I can teach you to do the basic Immanuel approach process in a weekend. And it's insane that works even at all ever. I mean, the fact that we can send a team to Uganda and they can have 45 volunteers show up, most of whom are like 23-year-olds with third-grade educations. And in 2 days, we can teach them how to help the person go to a positive memory, stir up appreciation to turn the relational circuits on, invite the presence of Jesus, and then be able to describe out loud whatever comes into their awareness so they catch the subtle things. Okay, positive memory, appreciation, connection with Jesus, we've got that in place. That's a good place to start, and we can come back to it if we need to for the safety net. Okay, now, help them go to a painful memory. And as soon as they get into painful memory, the first thing you do is help them connect with Jesus there. And then you, inside the painful memory, and they can perceive Jesus there, you basically coach them, okay, Jesus is now the therapist. Just look at him, ask him for help, tell me what happens. And if you get in trouble, go back to the safety net. We can teach 23-year-olds with third-grade educations to do that in 2 days. And they go out into the nearby villages, and oh my God, it's crazy that works at all, let alone 80% of the time. I mean, in third world countries where there's lots of faith, it's insane how much that simple tool works, and for horrible trauma. I mean, not just like, oh, I got a B in my algebra test, in 8th grade, and I was a straight A student. That was really embarrassing. We're talking like, oh, I saw my parents chopped up with machetes in my front yard. Insane stuff. The fact that ever works with the basic tools for a 23-year-old volunteer with a 3rd grade education who learned it in 2 days, that's insane. So you can learn the basic tools in a weekend, and they work, I don't know, half the time, 2/3 of the time, whatever. That's outrageous. You can spend the rest of your life learning the intermediate and advanced tools, because there's just a huge pile of complicated stuff that sometimes happens. And so I tell people, learn the basic stuff, use those tools wherever you have the opportunity, use the safety net if you get in over your head. And then for all the people that God calls to more, especially mental health professionals, I'm always encouraging, hey, mental health professionals, part of your job is to learn the intermediate advanced tools. And what I found is all over the place. If lay people, if they know that they have backup, if they have the safety net, so, okay, if I get in over my head, I can take them, I can get their plane back on the ground, and then I can go talk to Carrie, and she knows more of the intermediate advanced tools. So I can do the basic, I'll pick all the low hanging fruit. And if I have something I can't handle, I've got somebody who can kind of back me up. And if they have a mental health professional or somebody in ministry with more training, you can have 20 or 30 lay people picking all the low hanging fruit for free for one person who has deeper knowledge and will back them up. Now, that plan, we actually have a chance of making a dent.
Absolutely.
So that's the sort of the first dump of the basic stuff.
There's so many more questions that I have that we could dive into, because you've just pointed out how much more there is to this. But I think that for the purposes of this conversation, I first of all want those listening to hear that there is hope. If they have felt stuck, if they've been going to therapy, if they've been doing all the things, and it starts with learning that connection with him. It starts with being able to have that interactive, intimate relationship with him that he desires, and that he has designed us. I love the brain science behind it, but that he has designed us to have. I am so amazed by that, just the fact that he structured us for that. We are designed specifically to have relationship with him because he is love, and love is relationship.
Love is relational.
Yes.
Love is inherently relational. Yep, it all fits together.
It does. It's amazing how it all connects. And you're talking about how, like, when you look at it after it's all laid out, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. I think part of that is just that you have made it so believable and approachable. And even what scripture says, like it says the enemy blinds the unbeliever. So if you're not believing that God really is connectional, that he really does care, if you don't believe that, you don't get it. But when you start seeing, oh, this makes sense, this is logical, that we have brain science to back this up, this is something that makes so much sense, I can believe this. And then therefore things start becoming real to us. And it becomes not just theory on a page, but it becomes something we can practice and live.
Yes. Yes. All true. Here's a fun little, give you a little bit more brain science research on learning theory. I mean, people
love it.
People have debated forever on like, what's more effective, sort of explaining the theory. I'll write a book about the theory. I'll give a lecture about the theory. Is it more important to explain the theory, or to just kind of throw them in the lab and have them experience it? Is experience a better teacher, or is it more important to learn the theory? And folks have debated that, forever. Well, a really elegant research team, and this maybe it's 30 years ago now, very, very well done research. They had 3 groups of students. And it's really well designed as far as they had a theory unit, which is like an hour of written and lecture explanation of the theory. And they had an hour unit, which is, they designed it very carefully, where they put them in a situation where they sort of encounter experientially the phenomena they're talking about. And so one group of students had 2 experience lab units. One group had 2 theory explanation units. And one group experienced it and then explained it. They had one group that they combined the experience and the explanation. So everybody, I'm sure, can think, oh, I'll bet the one with one of each was better. Correct. Well, so first, interesting, the 2 experience lab units and the 2 lecture explanation units, those are about the same. When they and the evaluation was not like a paper test. I can't remember if they waited a month or a few weeks, or whatever, but a while after the training, They just put them in a situation. And the evaluation was they had to be able to recognize, oh, this is the thing I learned about, and actually be able to apply the theory. So that's like in real life, that's what you're testing. You need to be able to say, oh, here it is, and I know what to do, and you can actually do it. So that was the evaluation, which is, I think, that's the real evaluation in real life. And the 2 lab and the 2 experience, the 2 experience lab and the 2 explanation were about the same. And the experience 1 and explanation 1 was better. Guess how much better?
How much?
300%, 3 times.
No.
It wasn't a subtle effect size. It's not 15% improvement. It's 3 times, 300% better. Oh, and guess what? The right hemisphere is kind of experiential. The left hemisphere is kind of language, explanation, theory. And the biggest neurological pathway in your body is the pathway between your right and left hemisphere. So God totally designed your brain to do experiential learning lab and to understand the theory and put them together. That's how your brain works. And if you do it that way, it works 300% better.
Amazing.
So again, like you say, to have the brain science and the theory to actually explain what we're doing, when you can experience it and understand it theoretically, when you have both of those together, it's 3 times as powerful, and you can feel it.
That's incredible. It never ceases to amaze me how God's design is so intricate and how he gave us every bit of the tools we need, everything that we need. And when we always seek him first, we always go to him first and say, okay, God, I don't have the answers here, so I'm going to trust that you do. And that's the whole basis of all of it. It's just that's in a nutshell what we're doing, what we're talking about in this, because that applies to everything in life. And I've talked about that concept so many times on the podcast, just talking about how when we take it to God first, when we stop trying to be Lord of our lives and let him be Lord of our lives and actually go to him to be the counselor, to be the king, to be all that we need, the solution for every struggle,
things work better.
He's faithful. He
Everything
does it
works better. So here I'll springboard off of that and throw in another. This is one of my life passions. So I think all of us have at least small t trauma. I mentioned that earlier. I'm convinced of that. And I have 2 books out, Smarter Yourself and the Big Lion book. They both talk about that. My website talks about that. So if you're not convinced about that one, you can get out Smarter Yourself, and there's 3 chapters over 50 pages. I think there's a pretty strong. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that one. That we all have small t trauma. It's surprisingly easy to get, especially when you're a child. My experience also is that the enemy spends a lot of time. If I were the enemy, this is totally what I would do. Find every possible way to use unresolved trauma to interfere with the person's ability to connect with the Lord and hear the Lord's guidance. It's kind of the way your brain works. If you've got unresolved trauma in your biological brain, in your mind, in your spirit, if you've got unresolved trauma in your mind, brain, spirit, in your brain, mind, spirit system, it gums up the works. It turns your relational circuits off. It interferes with your discernment. It disrupts the way the system is supposed to work in 100 ways. And it makes it harder to perceive the Lord, and it makes it harder to hear the Lord. So that thing you just talk about, how if we seek the Lord and put the Lord first and go to the Lord for whenever we have problems, to the extent that you've got a bunch of junk in the way, that wonderful plan will work partially. The more you get that junk out of the way, the more old junk, old garbage, old trauma, old interference, distorted perception, the more you clean that out, the more easily you'll connect with the Lord, the stronger your connection will be, and the more accurately you'll be able to hear God's guidance. So to me, that's a really good argument that we should all sort of make it a lifestyle, learn these tools, pay attention to your triggers, and kind of every one of us should be on a healing journey where we're thinking, okay, Lord, anytime we stumble over another splinter, another piece of old pain, let's get it. Because to the extent that you've got all that stuff out of the way, and you can perceive the Lord, connect with the Lord, and hear the Lord, then that plan about turning to God for everything, that works better and better and better as you get the junk out of the way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
That's, yes. So anyway, anything else you want to try to squeeze in with what we've got left?
Well, I want to ask you to pray for those who are listening.
Oh, yes.
As they are learning about this concept and learning about what you're talking about, I just want to ask you to pray for them.
Right. And should we do that right now as far as what we got left, or is there?
That would be great. If you want to go ahead and pray, and then afterwards, I want to have you share more information about where they can find.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Oh, so Lord Jesus, Father God, thank you. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the amazing, wonderful, good news truth that you are with us. You have been with us. You are with us. You abide with us. That crazy thing you said about, I will abide with you always, and the Father and I will come and make our home in your heart. Like, that's actually true, and it's insane, and it's crazy, amazing good news. So Lord, as I ask, we release with our prayers your intention, your desire that every single person, every single one of your children would become more and more aware of that wonderful truth, that we would all be able to perceive your presence more often, more clearly, more constantly, that we'd be able to perceive the truth that you abide with us, that we would be able to remove the hindrances between our hearts and you, that we'd be more and more aware of your living, tangible, wonderful, interactive, life-giving friendship presence, walking beside us, abiding with us all day, everywhere. Lord, we ask for that, and we release that with our prayers. And Lord, help people to learn these particular tools. As far as I can tell, they're pretty good tools. Help people to learn them and use them with skill and anointing and discernment. And if there's I'm sure there's more stuff. Help us keep learning, and help us cooperate with the way you've created us, to be able to release the full measure of your blessings, to release the full measure of your intentions for us, to fulfill our potential, to be able to perceive you and connect with you and hear your voice and your guidance. In your name, we thank you for all these things. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. And if you would share with our listeners where they can find more information about you and the Immanuel Approach, that would be fantastic.
Yes. So one easy big one is we have a website, Immanual Approach, all one word. And on the website, Emmanuel is spelled with an I, but my wife was sharp enough to think, let's get all the variations. So Emmanuel, Emmanuel, Immanual Approach, all one word, .com, .org, .net. But the easiest one is Immanual Approach with an I, all one word, .com. So that's website, and it's got all kinds of resources. It's got 1,000 pages of free download essays. There's links to so the website is, it's got piles of stuff on there. And it's got a store page that links to any of our material that's for sale. You can find it there. And there's piles of stuff that's for free. So from that website, we got a great big book all about the Immanuel Approach. Then there's another book that's sort of about the whole idea of where does trauma come from, what's triggering, what's implicit memory, what are relational circuits. Sort of all the foundational theory is outsmarting yourself. And then the book that's called The Immanuel Approach. Guess what? It's about the Immanuel Approach. And it's all about the Immanuel Approach. So website, 2 books are big there. There's a bunch of videos. Also on YouTube, if you put Karl Lehman spelled correctly with a K on YouTube, and if you put Karl Lehman, MD, Immanuel Approach, the first 50 hits will be me and the Immanuel Approach. So Karl Lehman or the Immanuel Approach are both on YouTube or Google. You'll get piles of stuff. And then there's a new, this is like, I spent 2,500 hours over the last 2 years, basically putting a condensed version of my basic training seminar onto a set of DVDs. So for each piece, that thing about explanation and lab, so each piece of the Immanuel Approach, I explain the theory, and then Charlotte and I demonstrate it. And then there's exercise handouts so you can actually practice it. And the ideal is to get a little study group where you watch the teaching segment, explain the theory. And then for that thing about lab, the way your right hemisphere wants to learn is show me how to do it and then let me practice. So we explain to the left hemisphere so you don't understand the theory. Then we show you how to do it. And then you can break up into little groups and use the exercise handouts and practice it. So that's like how to do the positive memory appreciation, how to invite Jesus and perceive his presence, how to do the thing about describing the subtle things, and then the safety net, basic troubleshooting. Each of those pieces, we describe the theory, demonstrate it, and then you can break up into little 2s and 3s and practice it with the exercise handout. So that, from the website, you can find that. And that's huge resource that it's been 20 years in coming, and I spent the last 2 years specifically working on it. So you guys are bonus. I mean, until 2 months ago, it's like, well, read the book and wait for a seminar, which only happens once a year, and you have to go to Arizona or something.
I appreciate so much, and I'll share the links of those in the description to make sure everybody has them. I appreciate so much your passion for teaching this and all of the hours and hours and hours you have spent with the research and the practice and learning and just seeking God's guidance in it. Just know that you are extremely appreciated, because this is setting people free. And I am so thrilled to be able to share your message with those who are listening too.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for helping with that. I mean, as you can probably tell, the passion of my heart is that everybody in the world, I mean, a little bit of a high bar to shoot for, but I wish every single person in the world could learn to use these basic tools to experience the living, tangible, interactive presence of Jesus.
It's an incredible mission, and I want to support that however I can.
Yeah. So thank you for doing this podcast. That's one part of God's plan to help more people discover these tools that are fantastic and end up actually interacting with the living friendship, tangible presence of Jesus.
When we really understand who he is to us, and that he really means what he says, and that he really wants that deep connection with us, because that's who he created us to be, because he created us in his image. It's such a powerful, amazing, freeing, healing thing to understand. And that's so exciting.
So I don't know if do you have 2 minutes for me to tell a fun story?
Absolutely.
And whether or not I'll fit on the podcast.
I have as long as you have. So however long you want to take, feel free.
Yes. So here's a crazy story. So just back up a second. You know, what I talked about mostly was Immanual Approach for healing trauma, which is fantastic. But this is actually another part of the journey, was once we discovered, hey, well, we can use these tools to help the person connect. The first thing we do is connect you to Jesus. And then I said, okay, Jesus, what do you want to do today? The first time I tried that, I was thinking, okay, like, what trauma you want to work on and how do you want to work on it? And actually, maybe for the first 5 or 10 or 8 or whatever, that's what he did. But then once in a while, the person would be like, oh, Jesus wants to do something else. And I'd be like, what? Is that allowed? Just kind of like, is it allowed? Can you do that to like start the session with Jesus? I mean, does it work to connect with Jesus in a positive memory? I don't know. Let's try it. Well, that was, well, I guess we could do something besides just healing trauma. I mean, all right. And we discovered, well, sometimes Jesus wants to like do spiritual direction. Sometimes he wants to just build capacity. So like the bigger Immanuel approach to life, you know, using Immanuel approach to heal trauma is one part of it. But you use those first tools to connect with Jesus. You can just spend time hanging out with him just to enjoy being with him. Like, who knew? But that's another one. Oh, right. That's totally hugely crazy biblical. And I mean, and wise people for 2,000 years. I mean, if you look through the literature in the old Catholic Church, and I mean, people all over have been discovering, oh yeah, you can just spend time being with Jesus. That's a wonderful blessing. Well, me being a psychiatrist focused on trauma, hadn't really figured that one out yet. But you can just spend time with Jesus. Wow, that's cool. You can like do intercession. If you have a concern on your heart, you establish a connection with Jesus and just talk to him directly about, wow, it just burns my heart that there's people in Ukraine being bombed, and the poor Russian soldiers who are told they're going to go to do a parade. They're going to go do a military exercise. They're supposed to go like do a parade ground exercise. And they get there like, oh my gosh, we're bombing civilians. This is horrible. You establish a connection with Jesus and then talk to him directly about, this is on my heart. Can you please heal this? Which is a really profound way to do intercession. If there's a question you're wondering about, you establish a connection with Jesus and then ask him about, hey, can you help me, give me discernment about where to emphasize my energy in my practice or in my ministry. And you do the thing where you've got a connection with Jesus and you describe the subtle clues out loud to your prayer partner. You can use it for discernment, for addressing an issue, for intercession, for just spending time with Jesus. Oh, and you can also work on healing trauma. So that's cool. Well, it also turns out to be a really cool evangelistic tool. And I'm thinking about ways to, I'm working with InterVarsity right now to try to think of, are there ways we can do this on college campus, and we're pondering options for how that will work. But the way I stumbled onto that is I had, now pretty much 100% of people who come to me are like Christians who want the Immanuel approach. And the line is so long that I don't have a waiting list anymore. But when I first started doing it, I still had some unbelievers in my practice. And I mean, they called me because I'm a psychiatrist and they're in horrible pain. They've got panic disorder or depression, whatever. They're miserable. They're thinking about killing themselves because their life is so horrible. And they're just basically, hey, you're a board certified psychiatrist. Please make my pain go away. And I would say to them, hey, well, this is, well, usually this, I ask initial questions, I get an idea of where they're coming from or whatever, and discern and discover, okay, well, they're not believers. They're an agnostic, they're atheists, they're not Christian. Say, well, from what you've said, you don't actually have a personal faith. You don't believe in God. But the tool that I found that works the best is actually a faith-based tool. And I would propose that we would just try that first, because for the people it works for, it's particularly gentle and easy and effective. Same way if you had cancer and you expect me to say, well, okay, so there's a certain kind of lima bean. I mean, if the research from the last 2 years had just discovered, hey, there's this lima bean from South Carolina that if you boil it, in a certain kind of oil, it'll cure cancer. And even though that sounds weird, if I knew about that research and I didn't tell you, I would be incompetent. And if I knew about that research, you'd expect me to tell you, right? So I was like, hey, I know this is atypical. And from what you said, you don't actually believe in God, but the tool I've actually found to be most effective for the people who are willing to try it is a faith-based tool. Would you be willing to talk about that? And they'd say, oh, hey, Dr. Lehman, I'm going to put a bullet in my head if this doesn't work. So I'll try anything. So, okay, well, here I just described, here's exactly what I want to do. Just describe the process, positive memory. And so we'll do the positive memory and we'll stir up appreciation till your relational circuits are on. And then here's the prayer that I would offer to you. It's fine. You don't have to believe in God. You can do this. So God, I don't even believe you exist. But if you do exist and you're not a jerk, because a lot of people have had very negative experiences with faith. They've encountered really hateful, judgmental, toxic believers. So we'll do the positive memory. Then we can pray like this. So God, if you actually exist and you're not a jerk, then I welcome your presence. Would you please help me to perceive your presence? So would you be willing to try that? And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And if it does work, great. So they're sort of desperate. I have a unique window of opportunity because they're desperate and they're in pain. But so far, everyone I did that with, they were like, okay, I'll try anything. Every single one of them, they're like, oh, there's this guy standing in front of me. I think Jesus is standing in front of me. I'm like, well, how do you know it's Jesus? Like, you don't believe in Jesus. Like, hey, dude, when Jesus is standing in front of you, you know it's Jesus. I'm like, all right. So then we use it. It's like, okay, so we go to this. We'll ask him, where's your depression coming from? Where's your panic, whatever. So we do healing work, because that's what they came for. And sure enough, they go to some trauma. They go to wherever the roots are, and it works. They get great healing, and they interact with Jesus and get wonderful healing. And after a session or 2 or 3 or whatever, when they've gotten wonderful healing results, and they're really happy about that. I somewhere or another, I'll ask them, so what do you think about making an adult choice to actually follow Jesus? Because I just, from what you've said, some of these are children who grew up in Christian homes but kind of left the church. So I'll say, so you grew up in a Christian family, but from what you've said, it doesn't sound like you've ever made a choice as an adult to actually follow Jesus. Yeah, you're right. Well, what do you think about doing that? That would really make sense, wouldn't it? Because that would be the move of it. Like these young intellectual college students, that would be the move of integrity, wouldn't it? Because he's just kind of healed me, and he shows us, like, considering what he's done for me the last 3 weeks, that would kind of feel right to sort of make a choice to follow him, wouldn't it? I'm like, yeah, it would to me. All right, let's do it. That's one. And there's kind of ones in the middle. The most interesting one was total unbeliever, didn't know anything about Christianity. We do that for a few sessions, and we get to the end of, it might have been the second or third session or whatever, and he looks at me and says, Dr. Lehman, is this what you Christians do? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this thing about where you talk to Jesus, like this thing we're doing here, is this what you Christians do? And I said, I'm sorry that wasn't more obvious. Yeah, that's like, yes, a connection with the living presence of Jesus really should be a really important part. That should be the most important part of what Christians do. Yeah, that is the theory. That is a really big part of what Christians do. That is the most important thing of what we should do as well. So if I'm a Christian, can I do this? Like, if I become a Christian, can I keep doing this? And I was like, yeah. Can you? So what do I got to do? Like, can you help me be a Christian so I can keep talking to Jesus like this? That was like the easiest evangelistic intervention I've ever had in my life. It was.
That's powerful. That's so powerful. When people actually
crazy.
Experience that kind of love that Jesus has for us, that's so powerful.
It's just crazy. This guy, he actually experienced who is the real living presence of Jesus. And we didn't have some intellectual conversation about whether God exists. We didn't argue about, he's just like, well, is this what you Christians do? If I'm a Christian, can I do this? Can you help me be a Christian? Like,
amazing.
Yeah, we can take care of that right now.
Yeah, that is amazing. It's hard to even know what to say after that.
That's just so cool.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. So you are welcome. That's it. I have 1,000 other things to do. That's a good note to end on.
Well, thank you for your time today. It is very, very appreciated. And like I said, thank you for all the work, everything leading up to this. So
you are so welcome. That was wonderful and fun. And as you can tell, I love sharing about the Immanuel approach. So thanks for helping to spread the news.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Everyday Royalty Podcast. If you have loved hearing this conversation and you want to hear more like it, be sure to join my mailing list. You can do that at breakthrough.everydayincredible.net, where you will also receive a free PDF prayer guide on finding spiritual breakthrough. Always remember who and whose you are, and have a blessed day.